In the small village of Horvik, nestled between the black fjords and the whispering pines of Mörkvida, a boy was born on the night of a frozen storm. His mother, Thuri, had labored alone by the hearth, while his father, Brand, chopped ice from the well. But when the child finally slipped into the world, the wind outside fell silent, and the embers of the fire rose upward like little orange spirits fleeing a grave. Thuri first counted his fingers, 10, as any mother expects, then stopped. She counted again, 12, 6 upon each tiny hand, fully formed, each finger longer than a newborn's should be. She did not scream. Instead, she held the child close and whispered his name into his damp hair, Weimar, the sacred day-bringer, though no sun had shone for 3 weeks. Word spread through Horvik before the afterbirth was buried. A peddler passing through carried the rumor to Vatskelde, and from there it leaped to Raudamiri, and finally to the stone-walled village of Steinborg, where the oldest among them remembered the old tales. For in Steinborg, more than 200 years ago, a healer named Eilif the Many-Fingered had walked the earth with the same 12 digits, living 178 years before returning his bones to the soil. The villagers decided quickly, as frightened and hopeful people always do, that Weimar was no ordinary child. He was the return of Eilif himself, the reincarnated hand of healing. And so the family that had owned nothing but a single iron pot and 3 threadbare blankets began receiving gifts: smoked fish, wool tunics, carved wooden toys, even a small pouch of silver from a farmer who had once wept at the feet of Eilif's grave. Thuri and Brand looked at each other across their small home, watched their son sleep with his 6-fingered hands curled like starfish, and wondered whether this was a blessing or the beginning of a debt they could never repay.
Weimar grew like a willow in spring, quick, quiet, and bent toward the light of the natural world. By the age of 7, while other children of Harvik were learning to gut fish and mend nets, he was wandering the edges of Mana Skogur, the moon forest, returning with bundles of herbs that his mother could not name. He would chew a certain silver-leafed weed for fever, press another's purple flowers into wounds to stop the rotting, and once, only once, he saved the life of a shepherd's daughter whose breath had turned to rattle and foam. No one taught him this. When the village elders asked who his master was, Weimar simply pointed to the wind, then to the soil, then to his own chest. "They speak," he said, "and I listen." And truly, something spoke to him. He could feel the birch trees groan when their roots were thirsting. He could hear the river whisper where the best moss grew for burns. And at night, lying on his bed of sheepskins, he often dreamed in the voices of mushrooms and ferns and underground streams. His 6-fingered hands became celebrated not as a curiosity, but as tools of mercy. And the villagers who had once given gifts to his mother now brought their sick to a boy barely tall enough to see over their tables. But Weimar did not grow proud. He grew inward, thoughtful, watching the horizon with eyes that seemed older than his years. At 14, he saved a man from a snake's bite using a root that grew only under dead oaks, and the man swore he saw the boy's shadow flicker into the shape of a much taller figure for just a heartbeat. Weimar said nothing. He simply washed his hands in a stream and walked back to the forest, where the trees were already calling him toward something he could not yet name.
By the time Weimar reached his 21st year, his gifts had deepened into something that even he could no longer fully explain. He had long since accepted that the spirits of trees and streams would speak to him, but now the dead began to whisper as well, only those who had left the world after his own birth. In the quiet hours between dusk and full dark, he would sometimes catch fragments of voices, a fisherman who drowned the previous winter, an old woman who had choked on a bone 3 springs ago, a child taken by fever just last harvest. They came to him like smoke under a door. He obliged when he could, delivering messages to grieving families without ever explaining how he knew. But the barrier troubled him. He could not reach his grandfather, who had died the year before Weimar was born. He could not reach Eilif the Many-Fingered, the legendary healer whose shadow he was said to wear. Something stood between them and the deeper past, a wall made not of stone but of time itself, and it gnawed at him like a rat in his rib-cage. On the night of the full moon, unable to sleep, he took his leather satchel and walked into Monaskoger. The forest was silver and black, the old pines creaking in a breeze that felt less like wind and more like breath. He followed no path, trusting his feet to find what his heart needed. And then he saw it. A plant no taller than his knee, its leaves like curled iron, its blossoms glowing with colors that did not exist in daylight, soft blues that burned, greens that pulsed like a heartbeat, reds that whispered. It stood alone in a small clearing where no moonlight should have reached, yet it shone brighter than the moon itself. The voice came not from the air, but inside his skull, calm and ancient. Consume me, and that which you earnestly seek will be available to you.
Weimar did not hesitate. A dark smile, thin and unfamiliar, crossed his lips, and he plucked one of the glowing flowers from the plant. The moment his 6 fingers closed around the bloom, he felt a pull, as though the forest floor had become a river dragging him downward. He put the flower into his mouth and swallowed. It tasted like cold iron and summer honey, and something older than both. Immediately his body lifted from the ground, not a jump, not a leap, but a slow, silent levitation that brought him a few inches above the moss. His spine arched, his head tilted back, and his eyes, which had always been the color of wet river stones, blazed into brilliant blue, the kind of blue that belongs to deep ice or the heart of a flame. He floated there for what felt like a single breath, and also for an entire night, suspended between the forest floor and the full moon. Then something clicked inside him, a door opening, a lock breaking, a knot being untied by invisible fingers. He fell back to his feet with a soft thud, and for a moment the world was unbearable. He saw auras, every tree wrapped in silver mist, every stone pulsing with gray light, every sleeping creature flickering like a candle in a dark room. Then the smells came, miles of them, the sour breath of a badger in its set, the sweetness of a distant pine on fire, the salt of the sea beyond Myrkvida, all at once and all too loud. His own hearing became a curse, the whisper of beetles under bark, the creak of growing roots, the distant mutter of a man snoring in Horvik 2 valleys away. He clapped his hands over his ears and fell to his knees, gasping. But slowly as ice melting, the chaos settled into order. The auras dimmed to a gentle shimmer. The smells arranged themselves into layers he could choose to follow or ignore. The sounds became a symphony he could conduct at will. He opened his eyes, and they were normal again. But he was not.
He walked back to Harvik under the same full moon, each step feeling like both a homecoming and a betrayal. When he pushed open the wooden door of his parents' home, Thury looked up from the hearth, her face creased with worry. She opened her mouth to speak, but Weimar heard her voice before it left her throat. "Only God knows where you have been," her thought came, sharp and clear as a bell. "I wonder why your clothes are wet when it never rained." He looked down at his tunic, damp with forest dew, and answered before she could speak aloud. "It was just me sweating in the woods while talking to the plants, Mother." Thury froze. Her hand stopped mid-reach for a clay cup. Her lips parted, then closed, then parted again. "I did not say that." "You did not have to," Weimar said gently, and the horror that bloomed across her face was like watching a flower turn to ice. She shoved him away from her own son, and backed into the shadows of the hearth. Brand came in from the night, stamping snow from his boots, and found his wife staring at their boy as though he were a stranger wearing a familiar skin. Weimar explained in low, hurried words, leaving out the strange plant and the blue fire in his eyes, simply saying that the forest had given him a new gift, one he had not asked for. He gripped his mother's shoulders until her trembling slowed. "You must tell no one, not the neighbors, not the elders, not even Aunt Kelda. If the village knows I can hear their thoughts, they will stop seeing a healer. They will see a spy, a judge, something they cannot understand." Thury nodded slowly, and Brand sat down heavily on a stool, rubbing his face with a hand that would not stop shaking. That night, Weimar did not sleep. He sat by the cold hearth, watching the auras of his sleeping parents shift through shades of worry, love, and fear, and he wondered if he had already crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The plant had given him what he sought, but he had not asked what the cost would be.
8 days passed like 8 slow heartbeats. Weimar returned to Manaskogur each night, but the glowing plant was nowhere to be found, only bare soil in the clearing where it had bloomed, as though the earth had swallowed it whole. He walked the same paths, sniffed the same winds, whispered the same questions to the trees, but the forest offered only silence. His frustration grew into a low, gnawing ache behind his ribs. Then he remembered the moon. It had been full when he ate the flower, and on the 8th night the moon swelled again to its silver roundness, hanging low and heavy over the black pines. He went back one more time, not hoping but unable to stay away, and there it stood, the plant, glowing in the exact same spot, its colors more vivid than before, as if it had been waiting for this exact alignment of light and shadow. He approached slowly, his 6-fingered hand outstretched, when the air above the plant began to shimmer and twist. A hologram took shape, faint at first, then solid as a memory made flesh. It was an old man, but only from the chest upward, his lower half dissolving into mist above the flower. His face was lined like cracked riverbed, his eyes white as frozen lakes, and his mouth moved before any sound came. "Weimar," the apparition said, and the voice was not one voice, but many, layered like a choir of ghosts. "I am not a man. I am a seal left behind by those who came before you, your ancestors, the 6-fingered ones. I serve only the chosen of the next 2 generations, and you are the first." Weimar's heart hammered against his ribs, but he did not run. The old image told him everything, a lost settlement of 12-fingered people, each gifted with powers beyond human reckoning, their slow corruption into arrogance, their demand to be worshipped as gods, and finally their leader, Kale the Sunderer, who performed the most forbidden magic their kind had ever known. He cursed them to never walk in sunlight again, then banished the entire clan beneath a mountain called Yarnfall, sealing its location from all memory. You alone can find that mountain. You alone can open it or leave it shut forever. Choose, chosen one. Remain with the humans who have loved and worshipped you since birth and keep the balance, or reunite with your lost kin beneath the earth and risk bringing their old hunger back into the world.
Then the image faded, and Weimar stood alone in the moonlit forest, holding the weight of 2 futures in his 12 fingers.